As someone who's enjoyed science fiction for pretty much their entire life, when I saw Genotype, it was definitely a game that got me interested based on its setting and its weapons alone. When I heard that you were stranded on the South Pole with nothing to defend yourself with, besides a pair of gloves that printed living weapons, I haven't heard of anything weirder in VR, and I instantly said I need to give this game a try. Now, I will warn you, there will be very minor spoilers, nothing conducive to the main story or main plot or anything like that. We try and touch the story as little as possible, but that being said, if this is your first time here, my name is Butter Something, and I want to welcome you to the only channel that offers reviews long enough to make you look like an iPad kid. Genotype starts you off in the worst possible place they could, and that is outside in the middle of the South Pole in a blizzard. Now, this atmosphere itself is eerie, especially after you've seen the trailer for this game, and it just gets worse. Dan, your guide that says you are eventually going to have to do this alone one day, loses his way and actually has you all end up in a defunct facility for deadly virus research. And the virus is airborne in this facility. As soon as you crash, you are infected. And there's nothing you can do but find a cure. You hear a voice over the radio. Their name is William. And you listen to all of what has happened here, and he tasks you with retrieving DNA samples around the facility to find and create a cure for the disease that is running rampant. Gameplay loops are very important, and Genotypes, although it's not lengthy loop-wise, the loop is still enjoyable. However, where it lacks is the story beats. I felt like there were spots that I should have been given a little more information, or found a cassette tape, or been told by my partner in crime over the radio a little bit more about the facility. But it seemed like there were long stretches of time that I just was not getting anything, and it felt like I really should be. That being said, the good parts of the loop are more or less the puzzles and just really enjoying the level design within Genotype and seeing the different environments that have been made by the developers. That was probably one of the best parts of having 4 different facilities, or branches is what we will call them. It really made it so they could have a unique art direction for each of these. Now, the end of every single branch culminates in a unique boss fight. However, these bosses visually are just bigger forms of the enemies that you've already seen. And unfortunately, some of these are a little unbalanced, but we will talk about enemies in the enemy section of the review. After the boss battles, you essentially get a piece of that cure, which you will then bring with you to the next branch, thus repeating this loop of going in, discovering what you can, having a boss battle, getting a piece of the cure, and moving on. Now, I will say that during this loop, you are heavily rewarded for exploring every crevice that you possibly can get into, and the brain link is going to come in massive handy. And as of right now, you don't know what the brain link is, and we will talk about that within the weapons section of this review, because it is actually a very cool mechanic that I think is one of the most unique parts of Genotype. There are many tools that you will use throughout your adventure in the South Pole, and we're going to start by talking about the Great Gloves. These are officially the first piece of equipment that you will be able to interact with when you crash, and you are given a type of Omnitrix, if you will. It's similar to the Bone Labs device, where you pull the ripcord and it changes whatever weapon you're using. Now, Personally, I did fumble with the grade gloves when changing weapons under pressure. Unfortunately, if you do make the mistake and choose the wrong weapon, you will have to wait for the animation of that weapon to fully finish before you can make another selection. I think this was probably the biggest gripe I had, realistically. However, this may truly be part of the design to add additional stress and anxiety to the situation when you are going through the facility. The next piece of equipment or tool you will use is the health pack. This is something that is scattered throughout the entire game, but it is also something you can craft with biomass. Biomass is the essential currency of Genotype and is used to craft health, rockets, and ammo for your weapons. On my second playthrough after the update, I found that the rockets were actually really useful. They were initially, but again, the hardest thing about these is that when you have to use them, you have to pull them out of your menu, and that menu automatically updates for you moving. So what will happen is you will move, and then after you've done that, if you are in like the middle of a boss battle or something, it will close that menu. So you need to grab the rockets fast enough to be able to actually use them while in some of these fights. During the brutal difficulty playthrough, which again is my second playthrough, I was having just such a hard time grabbing these at the same time as fighting the very first boss, as you're seeing here. So I love the rockets. I love everything about them. They work really well. They shoot pretty intuitively, but it's just so hard to grab them out of that menu, and I think this is more of a menu issue than a rocket issue. The last tool you're going to get is the liner tool, and this essentially just makes it so that you can jump power from a power source to a socket. That is about the only use that this tool has, and yes, it is a creature. However, since it does not have a way to reliably do damage to anything, I have not included it in the weapons section of the video. Now, I wish it did more. I feel like it was kind of a wasted potential, since there were only about 3 rooms that you used it in, and then a hidden room that you could use it to get into. Other than that, it was kind of disappointing, unfortunately. However, the design itself was very cool. It kind of reminded me of the Vortigaunts from the Half-Life series with their, electric hands. Before we get into weapons, I do want to talk about the character progression, as it is important to the weapon upgrades and understanding what I mean when I'm talking about those. So throughout the entire facility, there are tokens. These are used to upgrade your character with 4 tiers of perks when you are at an upgrade station. These are essentially upgrades to the grade gloves technically, but I consider these passive perks for your overall character. Now, these tokens are scattered all around the facility, so you are going to want to make sure that you check every corner of every room to make sure that you have not missed any of these points, because you can end the game up with not getting enough points to unlock every single slot. That being said, let's go ahead and talk about this very first slot and what these perks will mean. The first slot that you unlock is slot 0, and to me, all of the perks that are in this slot should be spread out between the other 3, or keep one in this slot and, put one in slot 1 and slot 2. But the perks here just feel like overall they are the most useful out of the entire game, in my opinion. The first slot consists of more damage for crits, a movement speed increase, or a 15% chance to craft an extra item whenever you do craft those items, whether that be ammo, rockets, or health packs. You have a 15% chance to craft a second one. Now, with this, I did choose to move quicker, as I felt like overall it was probably the best option in this specific instance, only because overall, nothing that you chose in any of these slots actually mattered in any meaningful way, which I will explain a little bit further when we get to the end of our character progression. Unfortunately, these last 3 slots are kind of reduced down to variations of the following slot as you unlock them. So slot 1, which is technically our second passive perk, is offered at a 100% crit chance when you are below 25% health, a 50% chance for an instant revive with 50% of your health, or an increase of your maximum health by 50%. Now, as I was not dying and I had no plan to die, I opted for the additional 50% to my max health. So now I had 150 health. That being said, there was a point in time that I felt maybe the 50% revive rate could have helped, as I did manage to die an hour after my previous save, and I actually logged off after that because I did not want to deal with that again. That being said, this was the only instance that I would have taken the 50% revive chance, and even then, it may have not mattered in the long run. For perk 3, you are offered 3 perks, which again, kind of redundant here, but one of them is 10% additional damage at full health, healing for 10% of any damage that you deal, or dealing 50% more damage when you are below 25% health. Since I didn't take any additional damage perks at low health from slot 1, I also didn't take any here, as to me, it would have been counterproductive in many ways. For the very final slot, you do need to have 100 additional tokens, so that's why I said earlier you need to make sure you are going around and collecting all the tokens you can possibly find, search every corner, every crevice. However, even then, as you get this final perk, probably around an hour and a half to 2 hours towards the end of the game, it doesn't necessarily feel needed anymore. I didn't need any more money, didn't need any more healing, didn't need any reduced damage, but as not to waste this slot, I decided to take the healing infusion perk, is what it's called. And this perk offers me a 20% chance to heal for 10% of my health when I am damaged by an enemy. So 1 in every 5 hits, instead of it hurting me, it would heal me for 10% of my max health. Earlier I mentioned how none of your decisions really matter when it comes to these perks, and for the most part, this is true. As long as you've unlocked a tier, you will be able to reset all your tokens. There is no cooldown on this, there's no additional cost. Nothing's just a few seconds of putting everything back. So when I mentioned earlier how I took a speed increase for my very first slot, I could reset my skills every single time I went back to an upgrade station and change it to that 15% crafting chance for a second piece of ammo, potentially. So for me, it just felt like none of the decisions that I made within this perk tree actually had any lasting effects whatsoever. And I feel that that's something that probably needs to change or was not built as intended. I understand that you want your players to be happy with their decision, and if they felt that they've made a mistake, they can change that. However, I feel that decisions like this should matter, and you should be punished for not necessarily thinking ahead. That's just me. Again, not everyone's going to agree with that, but I did feel that making the decision not matter here, and just making it so I could reset at any time, kind of made it a waste in my eyes. Now that we're done talking about character progression, let's move on to weapons. And just like character progression, you're actually able to upgrade each weapon individually. These are upgraded via the strains, and these strains are obtained at the end of the sections within the subsections of the facility. So within the crew quarters, there are a few different subsections. Within the lab, there are a few different subsections, and so on. You also obtain these strains from bosses. And I believe you get 9 or 10 of these throughout the entire playthrough, so you will only really be able to upgrade 3 and 1/3 weapons. Math. That being said, there is a massive difference between brutal early game and brutal late game. So when I talk about in this review that I ran out of ammo, it has to do with the early prior to upgrades. But again, they have on every other difficulty eliminated the worry that you would be running out of ammo. Brutal is just insanely crazy, and for crazy people such as myself. So I wanted to make sure I clarify that now while you're going through this. You will have a hard time with ammo on brutal, but that is part of the difficulty in my opinion. The splitter is the very first weapon you will receive, and this is what you start the game with. It offers 2 different firing modes, semi-auto and a grenade-like AoE for its secondary fire mode. This does take time to charge up, so you need to make sure you kind of have in the back of your mind that this is charging up, I can't use it. Now, I switched my weapon at the very end, at the end of its upgrade path, and made it so that I was able to fully shoot auto. However, you still need to do multiple trigger pulls, but it's more of a burst, realistically. The only downside is you will use a lot of ammo, and as I stated, on brutal difficulty, it really comes into play. On lower difficulties, it doesn't come into play as much, and you really do not need to worry about it. This weapon really reminds me of the alien mouth, like the small inner one for the alien, where it shoots out and latches on to whatever it touches. This is the grubber, and it's a melee damage weapon, so you don't have to buy any ammo for it. You don't have to worry about upgrade path. This is just physical melee damage, and it removes growths from some doors throughout your adventure in Genotype. The biggest issue I had with this weapon is when I was in combat, it necessarily wouldn't latch every single time. I would say 9 out of 10 times it did amazing, but when it didn't latch, it just felt like, why am I using this? And another bigger issue is that if it did latch, there was a 10 to 15% chance that when I pulled back, straight back, to actually inflict that damage upon the enemy, it did not register that. So my recommendation on this and how I feel it should have been is a little bit different. I feel that this specifically should have been more like those spring boxing gloves that you see in cartoons, where they open the box and it pops out and then goes back in. I feel like it should have been more like that for the enemies, because the removing the growths from the door, one, you can really, you can really aim and make sure it doesn't really matter because you're not going to take any damage. And I feel that that interaction with those growths is really unique. But I feel that for the melee, I just need to punch something with the grubber, because I don't feel that it's necessary to take a chunk out of an enemy when I can just hit them and do physical damage. That being said, whenever you use this, my recommendation is whenever you latch, move out to the side 90 degrees, just straight out to the side. Don't try and pull back towards you. Just move out to the side after it latches. I had a much higher success rate with that, with about a 5% failure chance, whereas the straight back pull had that 10 to 15% chance. Swarmer, both visually and mechanically, is the most unique weapon in all of Genotype. I don't care what anybody says, this is the most unique weapon in the entire game. From the visuals of a beehive to shooting bees out of this hive that home in on the enemy ever so slightly, and the secondary fire mode that has you shooting an entire beehive, which does an AoE type damage of a turret. Like, that right there is awesome. And to me, this weapon is the best in the entire game because of how unique it truly is. Now, although I did love this weapon, it does have some issues. When I played, the ammo economy was just really bad, and unfortunately I ran out of ammo constantly while using this. The other downside is that the accuracy, although they do home slightly, can be real tough to take out single enemies if they are strafing constantly. Because although they shoot fast, they don't necessarily home enough to stay up with an enemy constantly strafing. The incinerator is essentially a flamethrower, but regardless of how much ammo you have, you are going to run out in about 5 seconds. Overall, it's fun, but the primary fire mode only shoots 5 to 7 feet in front of you, and the secondary fire mode is a cloud of acid or gas, no idea. I'm not sure if you were able to light this on fire. I tried, it didn't work. So I don't know if it was glitch or that's just not a actual mechanic at all. That being said, it was just a waste to put any additional money into the ammo for this thing. If I found it, cool, but if I didn't, it's not going to be something I'm going to use. The very last weapon on this list is the Seeker. This is somewhat of a sniper as it does shoot straight and has no bullet drop whatsoever. I didn't really find myself using this just because it didn't really seem worth it until I used its secondary fire mode. Now, the secondary firing mode actually offers a slower traveling bullet, but it is AoE and will actually travel through whatever target is in front onto the target behind it as well. So I believe as long as the enemy is not moving at all, you will get 3 hits, I think. And usually you can get 2 even if they are moving. But it just makes it so much better for when you're dealing with an entire group of enemies that are really swarmed together. This can make it so that you get a lot of damage in a short amount of time. And if you have those perks where you get 10% back for any damage that you do, that's going to help fill up your health really quickly. When it comes to the enemies of Genotype, they actually offer a wide variety of AI difficulty across the easy, normal, hard, and brutal modes. As I played on brutal, I had pretty much what would I consider the best AI, as well as, I believe, additional mechanics to the eggs with legs that I'm going to talk about a little bit later, that would have them healing each other. So definitely used a little bit more ammo there, and as I said earlier, if you are playing on brutal, eventually you will not run into the ammo problem. It's not a huge deal. You will get over it. It adds to the difficulty in the beginning. And they have fixed the grubber, which was my bane of existence when it came to the crab enemies. As the crab enemies used to have a very, very long-range melee attack, and getting anywhere close with your grubber would cause you to be hit instantly. That is no longer the case on any size enemy out there when it comes to the crab type of enemies. There is a very accurate melee damage field and window, and overall a fantastic job. Before this update, it was horrible. I was getting hit from, 2 lengths away on these, these crabs. But now it's fixed. The grubber works to actually fight these creatures so that if you do have an issue and run out of ammo early on, you will be able to defend yourself with that grubber, even with, that 10%, 15% chance of not actually inflicting any damage because of the pullback animation. Again, do not forget, pull the grubber to the side. Do not pull it straight back. There is an enemy in Genotype that looks similar to an ammonite, which I've provided a picture here for you if you don't know what an ammonite is. And these shoot acid. Now, I don't have any issue with the damage effects that the acid does or the radius at which the acid affects you. It actually is very accurate, and the devs did a fantastic job with the animations of it and the overtime dissipation of these puddles. The one gripe that I have is that after I've eliminated a group of them, the puddle that they create in some doorways that I fight them through overall just takes too long to disappear, and I feel that if I've eliminated one of these enemies, the puddle shouldn't instantly clear itself, but it should start dissipating as soon as that enemy dies. It takes about 3 to 5 seconds for it to truly clear, and if you have 4 or 5 different enemies shooting at you through a doorway, it's going to fill up that doorway. You're not going to be able to get through that doorway until the acid dissipates. So it's not a huge gripe, but it was a very minor inconvenience in the grand scheme of things. It doesn't affect the score in any way, but as I do these long-form, deep dive reviews, it is something that will be included regardless of how much of an issue it truly is. The next enemy is called the eggs with legs, and there are 3 different variants of this, the first being the rhino horn. This is an enemy that will charge at you and only does pure melee damage. You're able to dodge this as long as you move to the side whenever they do charge at you. However, I do find it is much easier if you have that speed perk as well, because you will be able to move a lot quicker. Another one of these eggs with legs is the shooting type. These are just like any other enemies that'll shoot at you from a distance. They'll move side to side, and for the most part, with these, the biggest unique thing that they have is they have, on the higher difficulties, the ability to heal enemies that they're able to see. So they kind of work together in that way that they will actually shoot a heal pellet at one of their friendlies to heal them while you are fighting them. Now, does this eat ammo? It does a little bit, but it still adds an additional challenge that I appreciate. The last eggs with legs is the little guy, and this is just a small enough to step on enemy. Unfortunately, you can't step on him, but I would say for the most part, shooting these about 3 times on brutal takes them out, and you don't really need to worry about them. But then when they get close, they will jump at you kind of like a flea. But again, these are very easily dodged and won't take too much of your health, even if there are a group of 4 or 5. This is the dragonfly, and for me, this is probably my favorite enemy from all of the regular enemies because of the animations. When you usually see these enemies, you see them hop up from the ground and start hovering and flying. But also, when they shoot you, they do this kind of flip thing. You know, it's like a cat trying to get your attention. It's like, hey, look at me. I'm doing a trick. I'm doing a trick. I like that. I like that the animation time was put into that. But I feel like if AI was more looked at individually per these creatures, we could have had a much different experience overall. Now, we are technically not moving on to the bosses yet. However, there are some other variants of these creatures that seem to be an adult form of some of them. So there are bigger looking ammonites that have a much more wide AoE when it comes to the acid that they spit. They're very easy to take down just because they're slow, but the acid that they leave behind is just such a huge issue. It follows them, and they also are able to shoot it. So when I talked about earlier about this stuff dissipating after I've taken out the creature, this is where it really comes into play because they're just constantly dropping it the entire time. And if they are stuck in a doorway, you're going to be sitting there a while after you take them out. The second variant of a, larger evolution of one of these creatures is what I call the scorpion dog. And this is a dragonfly adult variant. At least that's what I consider it to be because that's what I see them with. And these shoot out of their tail. They're also very fast moving, and you want to make sure that you probably aim well enough to not waste as much ammo as I did at points in time. But with the ammo economy, again, that's more than likely going to be fixed overall. Moving on to the boss section of the video, the very first boss that you're going to be dealing with is a giant crab. This has more than 4 legs and may freak anybody out that has arachnophobia. However, this boss is not too hard to take down. I believe it was more of an introduction to boss fighting, and if you have the movement upgrade as your initial slot, you should be fine and be able to kind of outrun this enemy. Really, the biggest thing here is focusing on training the ads and making sure that if the boss is laying eggs, you take those out before they hatch, because the more enemies that you have to deal with, the harder this fight is going to become, and you want to make sure that you take out that boss as quickly as possible as to not waste more ammo than you need to. Now, I'm not sure if it was just me or what, but the second boss fight, at least for me, because you can kind of do these out of order, was a rhino experimental variant of the eggs with legs. This fight was very boring. They have a ground pound attack, which is unique to this specific fight, but again, it didn't really do anything. As long as I stayed away from it, it wouldn't hurt me. And it didn't move that much, just like other AI. It seemed that it was kind of stuck in its place. The stagger ability that you are able to do for this fight seems like it activated a little too much and didn't really give the enemy a chance to move all that well. And even with you fighting the ads, they never really come out of the eggs as far as I could tell, because I was shooting my, secondary grenade launcher from the splitter, and it just didn't make a difference in the fight. I think that if this enemy had a charge attack as well as the variant of ground pound, I think it would have probably been a more formidable fight. But overall, the lead up to this fight was more enjoyable than the fight itself. Now, the second boss fight out of 3 within the labs is not that intuitive. We just spoke about the first one, which was the rhino experimental eggs with legs enemy. That was our first battle within the labs. Our second battle within the labs facility is even worse than the first. Unfortunately, the AI again really is rearing its ugly head and just makes it so much less enjoyable, because the game itself felt like, at least in this fight, it was a game of cat and mouse where the cat didn't realize its cunning and decided it had to follow every rule and move at the same speed as the mouse. The fight didn't drag on per se, but it did not have any challenge whatsoever. It seemed like the enemy was getting stuck in ways that were just easily cheesed. And yes, you can say, well, Butters, you decided to do it that way. Correct. I did decide to do it that way. You know why? Because the AI allows it. Now, I think there needs to be some sort of fail-safe that says, hey, you're running into something. Let's try and, get a better vantage point on this. But no, that's not what happened. It doesn't do that. It doesn't think. It's no brain. And unfortunately, the AI really shows a lack of engagement in this fight. So the last enemy you're going to face in the lab is what's called the Huntsman. This is kind of a variant of the crab type, but it has the ability to teleport. I had a few issues with this. The first issue being you have to take down its health bar multiple times, because before you get into the boss room, that health bar represents when it's going to teleport away from you. Now, this fight used to be really bad because you were locked in a hallway with this thing and had a really long range of attack that just didn't make any sense, and you'd run out of ammo. That is not the case anymore. I didn't find myself running out of ammo on this boss. I also found the ability to use the grubber on this boss was fixed, which is amazing. That being said, still, whenever you go into a room and shoot the brain link or anything along those lines to go in and get your tokens, you would come out and have to fight this thing again in these small rooms. So whenever you're going through this, please do not enter any rooms. Just go all the way to the end of the hallway, get your bypass key for the level 2 bypass, and then go to the director's office and get the passcode for the server room. fight the boss, take it out, and then you can go ahead and go back through this section to each individual room and grab your tokens, because going into these and having to fight it multiple times is not the best way to present this fight, in my opinion. Out of all the facility bosses, this is the best overall fight that you will have. And when I talk about the facility, I'm not talking about the dig site, I'm talking about the crew quarters, the lab area, and the maintenance area. This is your maintenance boss. And I'm kind of happy that I saved it for last, because if I went here and then went to the lab, I would have kind of ended on disappointment there until the final boss battle. Now, the reason that this is such a great battle is the amount of things that are going on. You're being shot at, you're being chased after by the scorpions that will also melee hit you. You have a big giant bee flying around. Now, the AI obviously is still lacking, but again, just the sheer amount of damage coming your way is what really makes the difference when it comes to this fight. You have so many things coming at you that it does feel that the AI has gotten smarter, although falsely, but it still feels good. And I will say that unfortunately the boss itself still lacks that AI. There's no phases in any of these battles leading up to the final battle, and I think that's one of the most important things for making boss battles unique, is offering some sort of variation throughout that fight. You know, you did technically offer variation on the huntsman, because you did have me chase after it and take its health bar down for it to teleport away from me, but variation like that doesn't matter if you're not going to do it to every single boss. Maybe, you know, you have in the lab the rhino burrow down below and shoot out some type of eggs from the ground and the hole that it made, and then it comes out from somewhere else. Just something, some sort of variation would have made these other battles just as exciting as this one for the facility bosses. Now, I'm not going to show any footage from the final boss fight. Visually, it is a moment that you need to experience firsthand to really appreciate, just because you've put so much time into getting there, that if I showed you now, it wouldn't land as hard as it does when you see it yourself. That being said, this boss fight does everything that I think the others lacked. It has wave-based, it has pretty much every type of variation that you could want when it comes to actually challenging you. Now, I will say the challenge in and of itself, at the point of you being able to heal for any damage you do, and potentially not taking any damage when being hit, and just being healed for that, probably makes it a little bit easier, especially since I took perks that made it so I moved more quickly. But again, mechanically and just overall visually, this boss fight really does add a lot to actually feel like you've accomplished something in the end. And they should probably, on the next game, take a look at this boss fight and see what they did differently and say, look, you know, we need to make sure we add some sort of stage variation within each boss fight. Maybe have like a 3-tiered system. I don't know. I'm just looking for more challenge, and I don't want what I hope isn't going to happen. And that is the difficulty settings being added to the game and just making it so you just get damaged more. So that being said, this is the final boss fight that I do again believe that everyone will need to experience firsthand, as I'm not going to show anything here. But yes, very, very good. They did a very amazing job to kind of wrap this game up. And overall, I would say that if you're someone that enjoys shooters that offer story, Genotype is going to be that game that you really are going to want. The level and world design, just the environmental storytelling within Genotype is done so well that you believe you have experienced and seen everything that has been told to you so far through the radio by William. Now, I will say there are some spots that I wish it was improved. I do wish there were more off the beaten path kind of things, more Easter eggy stuff. But again, what they did is just so special. They had to design vents, they had to design crevices that only the, brain link creature can get through. They had to think about what to put in those vents to make them believable. They had to think about how you were going to traverse and find out story segments, all while building these environments. And if you're someone that plays games and really is in awe by environments of those games, Genotype is well worth the purchase for this alone. For me, I think that the way they set up the crew quarters was probably my favorite part. Although mechanically, the environment in the lab section is really fun, I think the environmental storytelling is really peak in the crew quarters because that's where you would live if you were a worker at this facility. And overall, I think that the storytelling with everything in that area, all the assets, kind of thrown around, you have chairs knocked over, people are essentially in a panic, and the environment that they've built makes that very, very believable. Fantastic job to the devs on this. As someone who advocates for accessibility in gaming, I'm definitely a hard pusher for it in VR. There are a few options in Genotype that help with motion sickness, such as teleport movement as well as fade. This makes it so that if you are prone to motion sickness, you have a lot lower chance of actually becoming motion sick. They also offer seated mode, which is good. There are some people that are unable to stand at all, and some people that can't stand for long periods of time. I have seen more and more developers add seated mode to their games, which is great, and I think needs to be a part of every VR game from here on out. But again, that's going to pretty much be up to the dev. But if you're not doing it now, you probably want to start. That being said, they also offer what I consider to be an accessibility option. Some just call it a mechanic, but I think this also needs to be in every single game, and that is the ability to grab assets, whether that be weapons, materials, health, all from a distance. Everything needs to have some sort of Half-Life Alyx-like grab, where you drop something on the floor and you need to pick it up. Some people can't bend over to pick these things up. They will be able to use that distance grab to bring it to their hand. Again, I think this is something that needs to be in every single game, and I do thank the devs at Genotype for including this mechanic. With accessibility taken care of, I want to move on to my favorite part of my reviews, and that is the Is It Reality section. In this section, it is not weighted in any way, shape, or form against the overall score. This is specifically a small section of individuals that love to be able to touch everything in a game. This is the people that knocked over everything on shelves in Half-Life Alyx, picked up a bucket off the ground and put grenades in it. That is what the level of immersion we are talking about here. Now, on the other side of the scale, there is games that shouldn't even be in VR. So, where's Genotype in all of this? Well, to me, I'd say it's more towards the middle. You have a pretty good offering of interaction. I wouldn't say it is past anything that you don't need. So, realistically, you're not able to pick up a bucket because you don't need a bucket in the game. So it is well above bare minimum in my eyes because of how many things that you can interact with, but it does not pass the survival test. And the survival test is, could I live here for a year with the mechanics that are provided to me? No, I would die because I can't pick up any type of food. And that would be the death of me. So again, this is just a small section that we just have fun with. It doesn't weigh on the score or anything like that, but it's always interesting to talk about the level of interaction you can have in a game or an experience that really gets you to the point where you're like, wow, I could, if I wanted to, live in this game or world realistically with what the devs have done. So that is the review. This took me 5 weeks to do because they brought out an update that updated so much. They improved AI, they improved ammo economy, they improved visuals on the Quest 3. As you can see clearly in the video, it really is an NVIDIA RTX promotion commercial, in my opinion. It is immaculate. They did a fantastic job. The devs really care about the game, and I think you should pick it up if you're someone that enjoys sci-fi shooters with a story. These games are very rare to get. It's rare to get a story-driven shooter at all, especially when it comes to VR. So for me, this is an instant 2023 add to your list game. All of the older reviews that you've seen for this game, I don't think understand the difference that this update has made. So if you enjoy these long form reviews, definitely subscribe to the channel. This is what I strive for. This is what I love to create. And although my reviews do not come out day one, they are going to provide you with all the information you need and the most in-depth analysis of mechanics that you will find within the VR community. That being said, my name is Buttersomething. I want to thank you all for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and I'll see all of you in the next video.